Chapter 9, Community Organizing and Community Building. So we're going to focus on aspects that are common when we're working with target populations. We may define that as community, um, but basically when we're using the word community, and I'll get into this in the next slide, uh, there's a common thread that binds everyone that we associate with that community. So if we look at this definition, a collective body of individuals identified by common characteristics such as, you can read that. And this is very similar to how we establish target populations. We try to find um, that common thread or that common characteristic that is shared by all the individuals in the group. Um, the community, when we use that term, it implies that all the individuals are connected in some way. And why that's important for us to label it as such is that we're going to use those commonalities to reach everyone in the community at the same level. So one of the things that we strive to do with health promotion programming is we want to tailor to the specific needs of the target population. We've kind of addressed that, but you also want to make sure that your program is relevant to all the individuals in the group, because if someone feels that what you're doing isn't relevant to their situation, there's not really going to be a lot of enthusiasm or motivation to be a part of that program. So again, when you're defining your community, right, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find all those common threads that the individuals share and are linked together with, and you want to tap into that, because that's going to be kind of the conduit to reach the individuals in that particular group. So some of the things that some of the characteristics that we can look at to help us define the community is that there should be some sense of membership that the individuals have to that particular group, right? They feel that, okay, I'm in this club, right, and I'm a part of the club. Same thing we're trying to with the community. Someone that identifies, this is my community, I'm a part of that community, um, and they draw their sense of identity to some extent from the community. Because again, as we move through the program, we're always going to be in search of what motivates individuals to change, and it may be something as simple as to saying, look, this makes your community stronger, and if a person feels that they're a member of that community, then they want to contribute to the common good. Common symbol systems, this could be pretty literal, language, written and spoken, ritual ceremonies, something that every individual identifies with. Shared values and norms. That could be very important, because if you're trying to move a group of individuals towards a goal, and that goal doesn't line up with certain individuals' values, well, then you're basically fracturing the community simply based on not aligning with what each individual expects. Okay, mutual influence, meaning that um, what I do influences my neighbor, what my neighbor does influences me to some extent, but we're all influenced by the same type of sources, and we may come back to that later, because we may have to influence some attitude changes and things like that, and we want to kind of tap into that commonality. Shared needs and commitment to meeting them, right? So when you're doing your needs assessment with your target population or your community group, right, you want to make sure you're identifying needs that are shared by all the individuals. If you just cater to the needs of a subgroup, then you may not be addressing what the needs are of the other. So again, when you're doing your needs assessment, you may find yourself in a situation where, hey, here's some priority needs that we need to do something about, However, it's a subgroup of the larger community that we're working with. And that's fine, but if you go that way, you need to reevaluate the characteristics you're using to identify community membership or your target population. A shared emotional connection. This could be a characteristic. When you see different support groups, right? There's a common experience that the individuals have shared that makes them members of that support group. So again, that's really what I'm trying to get down to is when you're using that term community, okay, what are the threads that bind the individuals that make up that community? And then you can also identify it by location, right? The South Florida community, race, the Hispanic community, ethnicity, the Cuban American community, those types of things. But again, it all comes back to designing your program around those characteristics so that your program remains relevant to everyone in your group. Okay, population-based approaches, and this is opposed to individual-based approaches where you work with individuals one-on-one to address their particular needs. When we take a population-based approach, we're kind of thinking about effectiveness and efficiency and that balance. One-on-one is going to be very effective, right? Because you're addressing all the specific needs of that individual. However, it's not very efficient because that's going to consume a lot of your resources, namely time, if you have to work with individuals one by one. So we in health promotion, we typically take a population-based approach, a group-based approach, where we try to move a group of individuals through a program so that they can all realize change and the benefits that come with change. So, some common terms: community-based, right? Community empowerment, right? So, what do we mean by community empowerment? Well, we're trying to give individuals that are members of that community a sense of control over basically their destiny or control over the outcomes that the community experiences. Community participation, what does that mean? Well, it's easy to say, well, we'll get the community to participate, but what we really mean is all the individuals in that community are going to participate. Community partnerships, where individuals may not have the relationships to form partnerships. The community itself, may have been in existence for a long time, and there may be some natural partnerships that exist that we can tap into. Systems change, but what systems? Systems that are applied to keeping the community running, right? The healthcare system, the justice system. Pooling resources to deal with shared problems, right? So you may have one group in the community has access to certain resources that another group doesn't, and then we have yet another group that has resources that the other two groups don't have to. But since they all fall under the umbrella of the community, we may be able to pool all those resources together because the outcome is going to benefit the community. So partnerships and sharing resources are more realistic, or easier to swallow by people that hold the resources. Say, look, the community is going to benefit if you were to share these. Okay, community organization, basically an old term. Let's look at the definition: the process by which community groups are helped to identify common problems or change targets, mobilize resources, and implement strategies to reach their collective goals. So really it's this idea that as individuals we may exist in silos, right? We're doing our own thing. We're concerned about those things that are proximal to us. However, we still function within a larger community. So by bettering the community, we're bettering the situation for ourselves. So just getting people to recognize that, and recognizing that you are part of this community, the good and the bad. So if we all pull together, we can make effective changes at the community level that everybody's going to appreciate. Okay, so when we're working with communities to again, trying to empower these communities to bring about change and kind of better themselves. A couple of assumptions that kind of go along with this whole idea that in order for this concept to work, starting off with communities can develop the capacity to deal with their own problems, right? The, the, the change has to start from, or has to come from within, right? You may come in as the health promotion person to the community, kind of get the change started, but the change has to occur from within the community. People want to change and can change. Now, that's not to say that you may be working with individuals in the community that view the situation as a paradigm, right? This is how it's always been. This is how it's always going to be, right? There can be some misperceptions here, but the basis that you're going into is that people can change, no matter how difficult they may see it. It is possible. Otherwise, without this assumption, how are these programs expected to work? People should participate in making changes, right? And that's one of the knocks against health education only programs. You really need to get people involved, because we've talked about self-efficacy in the discussion and how important that is, and certainly verbal persuasion is one of the things that we can use. But really, if you could get the person involved in the change, that's where the real benefit is going to come from in terms of a sense of ownership and empowerment. Self-imposed and self-developed change is more lasting. So what this means is, you the needs comes from the community members themselves, and they're saying, hey, these are the priority issues that we see in the community. You're not coming in there and telling them, hey, this is what you should be worried about, or here's what you should be focused on. It needs to come from the community itself, because they know their situation. They know if change is going to occur, and how is it going to occur, and to what extent does it need to occur. Holistic is preferred over fragmented approach. To some extent, this idea that you take a large group, segment it into smaller groups, it's more manageable. But if you can take all the groups within the subgroups within a community and bring them together, it's going to make for a much stronger community afterwards. Democracy requires cooperative participation, right? That basically means that if you're going to meet the needs of all the individuals in the community, then all the members of the community need to kind of voice their opinion as to what needs to be done. If you're just collecting data from a few more outspoken members, that may not be reflective of what others are doing. Communities need help with problems just like individuals do. So, start looking at these communities as viable targets to work with, and change can occur at the community level just as much as it can occur at the individual level. Okay, so when you're deciding that, okay, I'm going to focus at the community level, what do I need to do? And basically, there's no one way or correct way of doing it. It's really dependent on the situation. As far as community organization goes, you can focus on locality development, meaning that these are going to be localized changes that individual communities are going to be able to see change, see benefit, and really it's a tailored approach, because by focusing on the locality, you're trying to include every characteristic that you can that defines membership to that locality. Social planning, this is more of a broad approach, and you're coming up with, okay, here's what an ideal community would look like. Let's go out there and try to change communities to meet this ideal model. And then social action. Here's where you have individuals within the community recognizing problems and acting on those problems. Okay. Now, as we come into the modern age, and this is mostly a result of more community level or community based approaches being put into play, we see some new categories when we're considering community organization. Planning and policy practice. So here you're looking at, can we develop policies that help individuals see what the expectations are. And we go in, and this is probably going to be the common approach that we would do in this particular field, right? We're using data, and we're letting the data tell the story of what's going on in the community, and then we're basing decisions off of that data. That can be effective. It's just as it can be as effective as the data are good. But it is a common approach because it tends to be the easier approach if we have a data set that kind of describes some characteristics and some things that are happening in the community, right? We can use that to kind of give us a little bit of insight as to, okay, well, what change is needed. Community capacity development. So here is where you're utilizing resources to equip individuals that identify with that community with the ability to see what the actual problems are. Maybe you're just bringing awareness to certain problems that exist with the community, but the more important part is that you're equipping them to actually go out and do something about the problem. And then social advocacy. This one is where we see that with some of the protests that kind of get a little violent, or they get a little stronger than what we typically think of with protests. But what's happening here, they're trying to draw attention to the issue. They're trying to kind of emote what the importance of the issue is, and that can be effective, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Can draw attention to the issue. However, you can go too far, and now attention starts to focus on the the negative outcomes, the destruction, and things like that, and your cause gets lost in that. So it's utilizing social advocacy. Sometimes you're kind of backed up against a wall, and that's kind of the last resort, but it still has to be used appropriately, so that you're not creating another issue, another problem that actually draws attention away from the initial problems that kind of started this whole process in the first place. This graphic is Minkler's kind of approach to laying out the different ways you can view community organizing and building. So look at it from left and right. So we have consensus and conflict. So consensus kind of implies partnerships and things like that. Conflicts means that we're dealing with a us versus them situation, right? Both are trying to bring about change to the community, but it's going to be two very different approaches with that. So if we look at consensus need based, so going into a community and seeing, okay, well, what are the immediate needs that have to be addressed, and we can engage in some community development things to fill those needs. So we have this on the utilize collaboration, right? If the community could do it itself, then it would do it. But we're saying that, hey, no, we're going to have to collaborate with others, bring people together in order to make these developmental changes. So collaboration, grassroots groups, right? These tend to be made up of individuals that have some vested interest in improving the situation. So the collaboration is more natural. Organizing coalitions, putting together mission or small groups that have the same common mission, um, involving your healthcare workers or health promotion workers, health education workers, building a community identity, or maybe changing a community identity. Maybe a community is kind of viewed as not as great as it could be, right? And you want to change that. Political and legislative action, right? There's a lot of resources tied up in political grants, political funding, governmental funding. Um, well, we need to collaborate with those groups in order to get some of those resources mobilized. Culture relevant practice. Again, it depends on the membership of the community. If the membership heavily relies on cultural identities, well, form collaborative efforts with cultural based groups. Then we drop down below strength based. So we go into a community and look at, okay, well, what strengths do they have? What resources do they have? And well, let's utilize those resources and build this community better, stronger than it was before. Okay. Um, Now, you try to align yourself with the powers that be in terms of leadership, you know, what's going on in the community. If we go over to the conflict side, right? So now we have a community that maybe relies on other groups for resources, and there's a conflict there. The social action, or the Alinsky model, Sal Alinsky was someone that kind of advocated for this kind of social disruption to bring about change. If we do what we continue to do, we continue to toe the line, things are never going to change. So we need to disrupt the system, bring attention to our needs. If we go over to a strength-based conflict, it's still social action, but it's more of a challenge to power, and not so much the disruption model that Alinsky put forward, but moreover, questioning authority, and by questioning them, you're maybe opening your eyes to those that hold the resources to say, hey, okay, maybe we should look into this more. All right, so this is in your book. You can kind of read that section on it, but basically this is kind of like the general model for program planning. It's just a generalized view of approaching community organizing and community building. All right, so similar to needs assessment, right, is recognizing the issue. What issue exists within the community? Now, chances are it may not be a community that you're a member of, that you're working with to kind of bring about change. So one of the things that needs to happen is that, okay, well, you need to find a way to engage with the members of the community. And that can be easier said than done. Again, remember, think about what we're talking about, right? The community is made up of individuals bound by common characteristics. If you don't have or share those common characteristics, then you're going to be viewed as someone that's not a part of that community. And pragmatically, this could be an incredible barrier, because if you can't access the community, you can't access the individuals in the community. How are you supposed to program any kind of change? So we need to identify who the gatekeepers are, right? And these are going to be individuals or groups that can help introduce us to the rest of the community. They can kind of vouch for us to the rest of the community, right? So that we are accepted by the community. again, it's easier said than done. It all depends on what the situation is. Um, the Tuskegee syphilis study in Alabama, right? Historical um, public health initiative to study the long-term effects of syphilis. However, there was many ethical violations that occurred within that particular study. That has created a long-standing mistrust of government uh, with the black community in that southern region. So what does that mean? It means it can make it difficult for groups that um, may want to come into some of those communities again to deliver some health promotion with the goal of improving the situation. There may be some level of distrust, for whatever reasons, that are going to be very difficult to overcome. But let's say that we gain entrance into the community. Now we got to start organizing the people, right? So again, we all live in communities. We all maybe we feel like we're members of the communities, but how much are we really involved with our communities? So organizing the people is getting those individuals that aren't naturally active in the community and kind of get them involved with what we're trying to do. Okay, so what types of groups can exist and that we can work with? All right, so executive participants. So these are going to be individuals that probably are currently already involved in some type of community change activities. Um, and you want to identify those individuals because right they're already motivated to improve the community, right? So we don't have to build that in them, and they may also already have experience bringing about some community change. So you want to identify those individuals because you're going to rely on those individuals to help bring in other people, to help make decisions, to help keep this thing going. Perhaps after the program ends and you leave, right? You still want the community to realize benefits. So who's best suited to do that? And like I said, you want to look within the communities for these individuals to kind of place into these different groups. Active participants, and these are going to be individuals that they're motivated to make the community better. Maybe they just haven't had or found the right opportunity for doing that. So this might be the perfect time to say, look, you guys, you want to do something here. Let me help you find a way that you can contribute to change. Occasional participants, these are people that have, a vested interest in the community getting better. But maybe they have some other things going on, or again, it may be they just don't know how to actually get involved. They're willing to do their part, maybe not take on a big role, but they want to contribute in some way. And then supporting participants, right? These are people, when you're asking for volunteers, they're kind of like, what, I support your cause, but can I just write you a check, instead of showing up on a Saturday and doing whatever. That's fine. Again, they're interested in making the community better, but their participation role is going to be different than some of the others. Down here, a coalition. So here you're just kind of organizing these participants into the coalition or the group, and this coalition is going to be kind of the spark to get things going as far as starting some change. But it's kind of just a community group that's going to be constantly looking for opportunities where they can be effective at making the community better. All right, so look at this orange box. So mapping community capacity. So really what you're looking at are, well, what are resources and capabilities that exist in the community, and where are they? That it could be geographically or something else, but you're just keeping a tab on what resources are present, where those resources are in terms of, how do I access them. And we're going to kind of illustrate this utilizing building blocks, and there's different levels of building blocks. So we have primary, secondary, and then we also have a category for potential, meaning that the resources aren't quite there, but maybe we can draw out resources from certain sources. So going in, kind of continuing on with this generalized model of community organizing. So we organize the people, and now we're at assessing the community, right? And what does that be? Well, we're assessing in terms of what the needs are, but also what resources are present that we can utilize. Now, once we determine the needs and available resources, now we can start to come up with a prioritized list of what do we want to focus on first, right? So we can think back to the priority matrix, right? The priority matrix, that's just a tool, and the tool is to help us take a long list of things to do and prioritize them appropriately so that we can get the most change for the resources that we have. So once we kind of set the priorities and goals, now we got to think about, okay, well, what are the solutions? What do we need to do to reach those goals? How are we going to reach those goals? That's where we start selecting the various intervention strategies that we've talked about: health education, communication, behavior change, that sort of thing. Okay, so here's an example of the assets map. So again, you're kind of seeking out the direct resource. Okay, what resources lend themselves directly to what we're trying to accomplish? Those are going to be our primary building blocks. If you go down to the legend, you see they're designated with a dotted line, heavy, basically a bolded dotted line. Right, personal income, cultural organizations, individual businesses. Right, these are things that we can tap into to address the issues in the community. But the thing is that the people that are holding the purse strings over these primary building blocks are actually community members, right? So that's why they're designated as primary, is because the resources controlled by the members of the community are going to be utilized to improve the community. The secondary building blocks, right, these are going to be resources, and it's denoted by the kind of the gray shaded blocks. That these resources may be located within the community, but the decision makers for those resources may be part of a larger organization that includes the community, but is not solely the community, right? So you have the police. If we're talking about a neighborhood in a city, okay, the police certainly can be a resource to that neighborhood, but chances are the chief of police or whatever isn't a member of that neighborhood. They may reside at the city at large or whatever it is. But we're just denoting that there's a little bit of a disconnect from the control of the resources from the community. And then potential building blocks, and there's just in the white boxes. And again, you just think we're just expanding outward from the community, right? These are resources that can be allocated for community improvement. However, again, control over those resources may lie in individuals or groups of individuals that have a bigger picture that they're looking at. However, again, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to steer resources towards the community, but they just may need some additional information or advocacy to help them see that, hey, here's where we need to allocate resources. Okay, the building blocks kind of went through that, but again, the difference between primary, secondary, and potential is going to be the relevance of the community to the groups in charge of those resources. Okay, so continue on with this generalized model. Implementing the plan. Anytime you see the word implementing, means that the plan has already been developed. We're just waiting for time to actually start the program. We implement the program. Evaluating the outcomes of the plan of action. Evaluation is always necessary. Otherwise, how do you demonstrate effectiveness of your plan or your program? Maintaining the outcomes in the community, right? Programs and plans, they're going to be finite, right? They're going to be finite, right? Because you come into the community, you're organizing the community, kind of get them involved with the change, but you're there based off of finite resources, right, to do a job. And when the time comes, you may have to move on to the next community, but you don't want any change that you affected to cease, right? You want it to continue on. So you need to think about, how can I maintain this change, and continue to change to better the community. Well, you're going to look back to your partnerships, the groups that you form, the coalitions that you form. And then looping back simply means that, while the model is presented in a sequential order, you may need to go back a few steps, maybe address those steps a little bit more in depth, so that you can, basically, really is freeing up resources to be able to get to the point where, your program ends successfully and the changes that you brought about continue on.